Hi, I'm Heather Ogilvie, and this is the Human Truths Podcast Scotland Special Edition. In this episode, we're talking about something we rarely name directly, yet feel every day: the energy of a nation. You see, countries have a vibe, just like people do. You can feel it when you arrive somewhere new. You notice it when you walk into a town, a workplace, a school, or a community. Some places feel alive, open, and forward-moving. Others feel heavy, stuck, or drained. These differences are real, and they matter. A country's energy is not a vague concept. It is the collective result of emotional health, belief systems, behaviour, leadership, and culture. It is shaped by how people treat each other, how leaders behave in public, how conflict is handled, how success is viewed, and how failure is responded to. Over time, these elements create a shared atmosphere that influences how people live, work, and contribute. The energetic vibe of Scotland matters to me deeply, both personally and generationally. My ancestors from Clan Ogilvie stood beside Robert the Bruce during Scotland's early fight for sovereignty. This history carries weight for me, because it reminds me that legacy is not about symbolism alone. It is about whether a country is actually capable of sustaining its people, its dignity, and its future. If we're going to speak about Scotland's future honestly, we have to look at the conditions that allow people to thrive, not only the structures that sit on paper. Energy is transmitted constantly between people. It happens consciously and unconsciously. A confident person can lift the atmosphere of a room. A fearful or hostile environment can drain even the most capable individuals. And those impacts can last for days, weeks, even years. This is not about positivity or negativity as ideas. It is about how a nervous system responds to one another. Humans are social beings. We regulate ourselves in relationship with others, and over time the dominant emotional tone of a place becomes the norm. In a country, this transmission happens at scale. Leadership behaviour sets a tone. Workplace culture reinforces it. Media narratives amplify it. And communities absorb it. When leaders model respect, cooperation, and visionary thinking, people feel safer to engage. When leaders argue publicly, demean one another, or act from pure ego, that behaviour spreads. It becomes permission. This has a direct consequence for economic participation. Someone who is low in energy does not have the capacity to participate meaningfully in the economy. That is not a moral failing. It is not laziness. It is a physiological and psychological reality. When people are exhausted, fearful, or disconnected, they struggle to create, trade, or contribute, even if opportunities exist. Money is not something that appears in isolation. It is something humans make through interaction, exchange, and effort. If people do not have the energy to engage with others, they cannot generate value in a sustained way. This is why conversations about money, productivity, and national strength cannot be separated from conversations about well-being and belief. A low-energy population cannot simply be instructed to perform better. Systems that rely on pressure, comparison, or fear drain further energy. Systems that build confidence, purpose, and belonging restore it. When we talk about a nation's energy, we are talking about practical outcomes. We are talking about whether people feel able to contribute, whether they believe their effort matters, whether they trust the systems around them, whether they feel respected by leadership. These factors shape productivity, innovation, and economic resilience far more than is often acknowledged. This conversation matters as much as money, structure, or policy, or the independence debate, because it underpins all of them. You can design the most sophisticated systems in the world, yet if the population is depleted, those systems will underperform. You can allocate funding, pass legislation and set targets, yet if people feel disconnected or undervalued or not listened to, results will fall short. Nothing we are discussing here is abstract. It is observable. You can see it in places that regenerate successfully and places that do not. You can see it in businesses that thrive and those that struggle. You can see it in countries that move forward with confidence and those that remain locked in internal conflict. If Scotland is to strengthen itself for the future, it must understand its energetic state just as clearly as its financial one. Legacy is not built through ambition alone. It is built through conditions that allow people to show up, participate and create. That is where national strength truly begins. Every human being operates as an emotional, mental, physical and spiritual system. These systems are constantly interacting with the environment around them. How a person thinks, feels and behaves is shaped not only by their inner world, but by the conditions they are immersed in every day. This is not philosophy. It is visible in health outcomes, motivation, behaviour and performance. People often say they feel disconnected from themselves, flat, anxious or unable to find their rhythm. This is frequently interpreted as a personal failure or mental health issues or lack of effort. In reality, it is often a response to sustained exposure to low or conflicting energy in the environment. When the surrounding emotional climate is tense, dismissive, fear-based or chaotic, people lose access to their natural confidence and clarity. They are still very capable, but that capability becomes harder to access. Environments influence self-belief more than systems acknowledge. A workplace that operates through pressure, constant evaluation or threat gradually erodes confidence. A family environment marked by criticism or unpredictability produces the same effect. Communities that lack safety, respect or opportunity slowly drain energy from the people living within them. Over time, individuals internalize these conditions and begin to see them as personal limitations. Energy transfer happens continuously. In families, children absorb the emotional tone of their caregivers long before they understand language. In workplaces, employees mirror the behaviour of leadership. In communities, attitudes spread through social norms and shared stories. At a national level, these patterns become culture. People do not need to be told how they feel. They learn it by observing how others behave and what is rewarded or dismissed. This is why it is so difficult for individuals to maintain a sense of self when surrounded by environments that contradict their values or undermine their worth. A person may know intellectually that they are capable, yet if every signal around them suggests otherwise, their nervous systems adapt to survive. They withdraw, become cautious, or numb themselves. This response conserves energy, yet it also reduces participation. It is important to distinguish between personal responsibility and environmental impact. Individuals are responsible for their actions, choices, and growth. At the same time, environments either support or constrain that growth. Expecting people to thrive in conditions that actively drain them is unrealistic. Personal responsibility works best when the surrounding system is aligned with health, respect, and opportunity. When environments are supportive, people rise naturally. Confidence grows without force. Motivation emerges without coercion. Self-belief develops through experience rather than instruction. People feel safer to contribute, to try, to fail, and to try again. These behaviours are not taught through slogans, they are encouraged through consistency and care. At a national level, this becomes especially significant. A country's economic climate influences how many people are able to participate meaningfully in economic and social life. Someone who is low in energy cannot contribute at their full capacity. They may want to work, create, or trade, yet lack the internal resources to do so. This is not laziness, it is depletion. Money, as previously discussed, is created through interaction and exchange. When people are cut off from themselves or from others, That exchange slows. Shared energy fields matter. When a critical mass of people feel supported, the collective energy lifts. Where large numbers of people feel undervalued or exhausted, or that they have to deal with unfair or complicated tax systems, the collective energy shrinks. This affects everything from productivity to innovation to social cohesion. It also shapes how future generations experience the country they inherit. Understanding humans as energetic beings living in shared energy fields helps us to see why some systems fail despite good intentions. It explains why policies alone cannot generate engagement. It clarifies why pressure-based cultures eventually collapse. And it points towards a more effective approach, designing environments that restore energy and confidence rather than consume it. For Scotland, this perspective is essential. If we want a population capable of participating, creating and contributing, we must pay attention to the emotional and environmental conditions we are creating. Energy is not separate from economics or governance. It is the medium through which all human effort flows. When we acknowledge this, we move closer to a country that supports its people to show up as themselves, with the capacity to build something stronger together. Let's look at why some places vibe and others don't. Places, that could be a city, a workplace, a house, but let's just stay with cities. They carry energy in the same way that people do. You sense it when you arrive. It shows up in how people move, how they speak to each other, how they hold their bodies, how spaces are used and how ideas are welcomed or dismissed. Some places feel coherent, others feel fragmented. The difference is not accidental and it is not imagined. Energetic coherence emerges when people share a sense of direction. It grows when there is alignment between leadership, community, opportunity and belief. In coherent places, people feel part of something larger than themselves. They may disagree on details, yet there is a common understanding of where the place is heading. That shared understanding creates momentum. Scotland is not one energetic landscape. It is a collection of very different energetic states living side by side. Small towns and cities feel alive, adaptive and forward-facing. Others feel paused, cautious or weighed down by the past. These differences are often explained away through economics alone, yet economics rarely tells the full story. The energetic and emotional tone of a place plays an equal role. Dundee offers a clear example of energetic coherence in action. Over many years, the city committed to long-term regeneration rather than short-term fixes. Decisions were made with the future in mind. There was investment in education, design, culture and innovation. More importantly, there has been a shared vision that extended beyond individual projects or people. People across sectors have worked towards a common direction. That shared vision matters. Collaboration increases, institutions align, confidence grows. Young people begin to see Dundee as a place where they could build a future rather than leave behind. The city's energy shifts gradually, then noticeably, and that shift can be felt in how the city presents itself, how people speak about it, and how external partners engage with it. Outcomes follow the energy, regeneration, investment, creativity, and renewed pride. Perth, by contrast, along the road, presents a different energetic picture. It is not lacking in history, resources, or potential, yet the energy feels less coherent. Momentum has been harder to sustain, and long-term direction appears less clear. Without a shared sense of where the city is going, activity fragments. People focus on individual concerns rather than collective movement. The emotional tone becomes more cautious and more strained. The difference is not judgment, it's just an observation. Places stall when coherence is missing. Even with good intentions, progress slows when leadership, community and opportunity are not aligned. Without a shared future to move towards, energy dissipates, people retreat into smaller circles, innovation feels risky rather than exciting. These differences are real, felt and measurable. They show up in population movement, business formation, educational outcomes and cultural engagement. They show up in how young people speak about their prospects. They show up in whether people invest time and energy into their surroundings or simply endure them. Energetic coherence influences economic participation directly. In places that feel alive, people are more willing to contribute. They start businesses, they collaborate, they imagine possibilities. In places that feel stalled, people conserve energy. They wait, they disengage, they lower their expectations. This behaviour then reinforces the existing state, creating a loop that is difficult to break without deliberate intervention. What Dundee has demonstrated is that energy can be rebuilt. Coherence does not require perfection. It requires consistency, trust, and visionary thinking. When people believe that effort will lead somewhere, they are willing to invest themselves. When belief grows, participation increases. When participation increases, outcomes improve. Scotland has a challenge that lies in recognising these differences honestly. Treating the country as a single energetic entity hides the reality on the ground. Some areas are thriving, others are struggling. Understanding why allows us to replicate what works and address what does not. Energetic coherence is not accidental. It is shaped by leadership behaviour. And this in turn influences investment decisions, cultural signals, and how people are invited into the future of their place. When these elements align, places begin to vibe. When they remain fragmented, places stagnate. If Scotland wants to strengthen itself as a nation, it must pay attention to these patterns. Regeneration is not only about infrastructure. It is about restoring belief, alignment, and shared direction. And this is where energy shifts. This is where momentum begins. Now let's look at belief, self-belief, and the transmission of culture. Belief functions as a form of currency within societies. It moves quietly between people, shaping behaviour, expectations, and possibility. This currency of belief is not printed or regulated, yet it holds enormous power. Where belief is abundant, people invest effort, imagination, and care. And where belief is scarce, people protect themselves, compare, and hold back. Belief is transmitted socially. It passes from one person to another through tone, language, behaviour, and example. Children absorb belief systems from families long before they understand the words being spoken. They learn what is possible by watching what is encouraged and what is dismissed. Over time, these signals accumulate and become internalised, and what begins as an external message becomes an inner voice. This transmission continues across generations. Cultures pass on their relationships with confidence, success, and worth in subtle ways. Some cultures communicate a steady belief that effort matters and contribution is valued. Other cultures communicate caution, limitation, or a suspicion of ambition. These messages are rarely explicit. They are carried in stories, jokes, warnings, and unspoken rules. Respect sits at the centre of a healthy belief transmission. When people are treated with respect, they begin to respect themselves. When leaders respect each other, that behaviour becomes normalised. When institutions show respect for the population, people feel safer to participate. Respect signals worth. It tells people they matter, they're listened to, that their presence has value. Self-belief grows in environments where people feel seen and valued. This does not require constant praise. It requires fairness, consistency, and recognition of effort. When people feel acknowledged, they are willing to engage. They take responsibility. They develop skills. They contribute to the collective. Self-belief emerges naturally when people experience themselves as capable participants rather than passive recipients. Low belief cultures function differently. In these environments, comparison replaces collaboration. People measure themselves against others rather than against their own potential. Success can feel threatening rather than inspiring. When belief is limited, one person's progress is perceived as another person's loss. This dynamic suppresses growth and fragments communities. Comparison thrives where belief is scarce. People watch each other closely, judging outcomes rather than effort. Fear of standing out increases, risk-taking declines, creativity narrows, and over time these behaviours harden into culture. People stop imagining alternatives because they have learnt through experience that belief is not rewarded. This has economic consequences. A culture that discourages self-belief produces fewer creators, innovators, and contributors. People disengage from possibility and focus on survival. Money, which is created through interaction and exchange, becomes harder to generate in such conditions. Participation drops and the systems strain under the weight of disengagement. Belief also influences how people respond to leadership. In high belief cultures, leadership is seen as stewardship. People expect leaders to act with integrity and competence. In low belief cultures, leadership is often met with skepticism or resentment. Trust erodes, cooperation weakens, and energy drains from the system. Scotland carries layers of belief shaped by history, religion, class, and economic change. Some of these beliefs have supported resilience. Others have reinforced limitation. Understanding this mix is essential if the country is to move forward. Belief systems do not change through instruction alone. They change through experience. People need to see respect modelled, opportunities created, and efforts rewarded. Restoring belief requires intentional environments. It requires leadership that treats people as capable adults. It requires workplaces that value contribution over compliance. It requires communities that celebrate progress without diminishing others. These conditions rebuild self-belief gradually through consistency rather than spectacle. Belief is not an abstract concept. It is a practical force that shapes how societies function. When belief flows freely, cultures expand. When belief contracts, cultures stagnate. Transmission continues either way. The question is what kind of belief we choose to pass on. For Scotland, this matters deeply. The future depends not only on systems and structures and whether we are independent or in the Union. That doesn't matter, because it depends on whether people believe they belong in that future. Self-belief fuels participation. Participation creates and fuels creation. Creation fuels resilience. Understanding this chain allows us to see culture as an active ingredient in national strength rather than a background feature. When belief is restored, energy follows. When energy follows, possibility opens. Now we'll look at why leadership is so vital in setting the emotional tone of a nation. Leadership behaviour matters more than leadership statements. People absorb how leaders behave towards one another. And this happens quietly and continuously. Whether leaders show respect, restraint and collaboration or whether they default to conflict, blame and performance, that behaviour sets the emotional tone of an entire nation. People model behaviour from the top, often without realising it. This modelling does not require admiration or agreement, it happens through observation. When leaders demonstrate calm, disagreement, mutual respect and long-term visionary thinking, those patterns filter down through institutions, workplaces and communities. When leaders attack each other, blame others, dismiss opposing views or centre themselves, those patterns spread just as effectively. The energetic impact of leadership is cumulative. A single argument does not define a culture, but repeated behaviour does. Over time, leadership styles become normalised. They shape what people expect from public life and from each other. They influence how conflict is handled at every level of society. Countries such as Japan, Switzerland and Finland offer examples of leadership cultures where respect between leaders is embedded. Disagreement exists and debate can be robust, yet it is contained within shared rules of conduct. Leaders are expected to behave with composure and responsibility. Public discourse tends to focus on outcomes rather than personal dominance. This creates an environment where people trust institutions more easily and feel less emotionally destabilized by political change. In these contexts, leadership acts as a stabilizing force. Citizens may not agree with every decision or with each other's beliefs, yet they experience a sense of continuity. The emotional temperature remains relatively steady. This steadiness supports confidence, visionary planning, and participation. People are less distracted by spectacle and more focused on daily life and contribution. By contrast, adversarial and ego-driven leadership cultures produce a very different effect. In the UK, Scotland, and, say, the United States, public leadership often unfolds through confrontation. Debates are framed as battles. Success is measured by winning rather than resolving. Leaders speak past each other rather than with each other. This behaviour is highly visible, emotionally immature, draining, and its impact reaches far beyond politics. When leaders argue publicly, interrupt, insult, or posture, they signal that dominance matters more than understanding. And that signal spreads. It shows up in workplaces where conflict escalates quickly. It appears in communities where disagreement hardens into division. It affects families where stress levels rise as uncertainty becomes the norm. The emotional cost of this style of leadership is significant. People become fatigued by constant tension. Trust erodes, engagement declines, and respect for each other and communities and the general population erodes. Over time, individuals protect themselves by withdrawing emotionally. They pay less attention, disengage from public life, and focus narrowly on personal survival. This withdrawal reduces collective capacity. Leadership rhetoric often sounds impressive. Speeches promise transformation, reform, change. Statements signal intent, yet behaviour is what people remember. Behaviour tells the truth. When leaders speak about unity while modelling division, the behaviour wins. When leaders speak about respect while practising contempt, the message collapses. This distinction matters deeply for national energy. A population that observes respectful leadership feels safer to participate. A population that observes constant conflict learns to brace itself. Bracing consumes energy. It leaves less available for creativity, contribution, and cooperation. Leadership behaviour also influences how people relate to authority. In respectful cultures, authority is associated with responsibility and stewardship. In adversarial cultures, authority becomes something to resist or distrust. Neither response emerges overnight. Both are learned through repeated exposure. Scotland sits within the second pattern. Public leadership has become performative, reactive, and often entrenched. The tone set at the top filters down into public discourse and institutional behaviour. This affects confidence, belief, and the willingness of people to engage constructively with systems. Changing this does not require perfect leaders. It requires a shift in what is modelled consistently. Respectful disagreement, visionary thinking, truthful accountability, shared responsibility. These behaviours stabilise the emotional field of a nation. They allow people to relax enough to fully participate. Leadership sets the tone whether it intends to or not. When leaders act with steadiness and mutual respect, they create conditions where people can do the same. When they do not, the cost is paid collectively. Understanding this allows us to see leadership as an energetic role as much as a functional one. How leaders behave is not a side issue. It is absolutely central to the health, confidence, and future capacity of any business, organisation, or an entire nation. Now we'll look at Scotland's wellbeing challenges through an energetic lens. When we talk about Scotland's wellbeing challenges, the conversation often focuses on visible outcomes. Poverty, addiction, disengagement, long-term unemployment, poor health. These issues are very real and they cause genuine harm. Yet they are rarely the starting point of the story. They are the surface expression of something deeper. From an energetic perspective, those challenges are outcomes rather than root causes. They reflect a breakdown in connection to self, to purpose, to community, and to belief in one's own worth. When those connections weaken, people lose the energy required to participate fully in life. Over time, that loss shows up in behaviour. Addiction offers a clear example. Drug and alcohol issues are often treated as isolated problems, something to be managed, controlled, fixed, or punished. In reality, addiction is frequently a response to a sustained disconnection. People numb themselves when being present feels intolerable. Numbing is not a lack of character, it is an attempt to cope when internal resources are depleted. Low self-worth sits at the centre of this pattern. When individuals grow up in environments where they feel unseen, unvalued, or consistently judged, belief erodes. When effort is dismissed or failure is met with shame, identity becomes fragile. Over time, people stop expecting good things from themselves or from the world around them. This state drains energy. It makes everyday participation feel overwhelming. Purpose plays a crucial role here. Humans are wired to contribute. When people feel useful, respected, and capable of offering something meaningful, well-being improves naturally. When people feel excluded from contribution, energy collapses. Purpose is not a luxury, it is a stabilizing force. Without it, motivation declines and disengagement grows. This is why behaviour cannot be fixed in isolation. Addressing surface actions without attending to belief and identity rarely leads to lasting change. Telling people what they should do does not restore energy. Pressure does not rebuild self-worth. Surveillance does not create purpose. These approaches may manage symptoms temporarily, yet they leave the underlying depletion untouched. In Scotland, many people experience a sense of exclusion long before any visible issue appears. Exclusion can come from economic hardship, education failure, rigid systems, or cultural messages that quietly suggest certain people are less valued than others. Over time, that message becomes internalized. People withdraw, they disengage, they conserve what little energy they have. Numbing behaviours then become understandable responses. When life feels constricted, numbing offers relief. When identity feels eroded, substances provide temporary escape. When contribution feels impossible, disengagement becomes safer than repeated disappointment. These responses are not choices made lightly. They emerge from sustained energetic depletion. This depletion has economic consequences. People who are low in energy cannot participate meaningfully in the economy. They may want to work, create or contribute, yet lack the internal resources to do so consistently. Money, as explored earlier in the series, is created through interaction, exchange and effort. When people are cut off from themselves or from opportunity, that exchange slows. Economic participation declines as a result. Addressing well-being through an energetic lens allows for a more effective response. Instead of asking how to control behaviour, the question becomes how to restore belief, purpose and connection. This shift changes the entire approach. It places dignity at the centre. It recognises that people thrive when they feel valued and capable. Restoration does not happen overnight. It requires environments that encourage contribution rather than compliance. It requires systems that recognise effort, not only outcomes. It requires leadership that understands well-being as foundational rather than secondary. Scotland's well-being challenges are not signs of inherent weakness. They are signals. They tell us where energy has drained from the system. Listening to those signals offers a path forward. When belief is restored, purpose follows. When purpose returns, participation increases. When participation increases, both well-being and economic strength improve. Understanding this relationship allows us to move beyond blame and towards regeneration. It reminds us that a healthy nation is built by supporting people to reconnect with their own capacity, and this is where lasting change begins. Let's look at the damage done by fear-based systems. Because fear is one of the most effective short-term control mechanisms humans have ever created. It produces compliance quickly. It sharpens focus temporarily. It forces behaviour in the moment. What it does not do is build health, confidence, or visionary capacity. When fear becomes systemic, it drains energy from individuals and, over time, from entire nations. One of the most visible examples of fear-based systems in modern culture is the widespread use of performance reviews. These processes are often framed as supportive or developmental, yet in practice, they frequently operate as mechanisms of judgment. People are measured, compared, and told where they fall short. Even when delivered politely, the underlying message is one of conditional worth. Constant evaluation erodes confidence. When people are repeatedly assessed against shifting criteria, their nervous systems remain on alert. They become cautious, they second-guess themselves, creativity narrows, energy that could have been used for contribution is redirected towards self-protection. Over time, vitality declines. This effect extends far beyond individual workplaces. Fear-based employment cultures shape how people relate to effort, authority, and risk. Employees learn that safety comes from compliance rather than contribution. Innovation feels dangerous. Speaking openly feels risky. Mistakes feel costly. These environments may appear productive on paper, yet they quietly undermine engagement. Health suffers under these conditions. Chronic stress affects sleep, immune function, and mental well-being. Anxiety increases, burnout becomes common. People push through exhaustion because stepping back feels unsafe. The body absorbs what the system demands, and over time it manifests as illness, disengagement, or withdrawal from work altogether. Low-energy populations struggle to contribute economically or socially. This is not a reflection of ability. It is the factual reflection of depleted internal resources. When people are tired, fearful, or unwell, participation becomes inconsistent. Attendance drops, productivity falls, long-term planning becomes difficult, and these outcomes are then interpreted as personal failure rather than predictable responses to pressure. Fear also distorts motivation. People begin working to avoid negative consequences rather than to create value. And this shift matters. Avoidance drains energy faster than purpose restores it. When avoidance dominates, people do the minimum required to stay safe. They stop offering ideas. They stop caring deeply. The system then complains about lack of engagement, creating a feedback loop that reinforces the original problem. At a national level, fear-based systems accumulate. When large numbers of people experience pressure without support, the collective energy contracts. Creativity declines, innovation slows, trust weakens, and respect goes out the window. The country begins to operate below its potential. Economic indicators may still function, yet resilience erodes beneath the surface. The relationship between fear, health, energy, and productivity is direct. Fear increases stress. Stress reduces health. Reduced health lowers productivity. Lower productivity weakens economic strength. This chain is observable across sectors and communities. This is not theoretical. It shows up in healthcare costs, absenteeism, early retirement, and disengagement. Fear also affects social contribution. People who feel judged or evaluated constantly are less likely to volunteer, mentor, or support others. They conserve energy, communities thin, social cohesion weakens. The nation becomes more fragmented as individuals retreat into survival mode. None of this suggests that accountability or standards are unnecessary. Structures matter, responsibility matters. What matters equally, though, is how those standards are held and applied. Systems that support growth through trust, clarity, and respect generate energy. Systems that rely on fear consume it. Scotland's future strength depends on recognising where fear has become embedded. It requires honest assessments of how workplaces, institutions, and leadership styles influence well-being. Removing fear-based mechanisms does not mean removing expectations. It means replacing pressure with purpose. When people feel safe, they engage. When they engage, they contribute. When contribution becomes possible, energy returns. Productivity rises, health improves, national vitality strengthens. Fear may control behaviour in the short term, yet it weakens systems in the long term. A country that wants to thrive cannot afford to build its future on depletion. It must design systems that restore energy rather than consume it. Now let's look at religion, control and energetic suppression for Scotland. Scotland's energetic landscape has been shaped by many forces over centuries, and one of those most influential has been religion. Religious institutions have played important roles in community, education and moral guidance. At the same time, in parts of the country, rigid interpretations of religion have left a lasting imprint on how worth, behaviour and identity are experienced. In these contexts, worthiness has often been tied to conformity. People have learnt, sometimes explicitly and sometimes quietly, that acceptance depended on behaving in certain ways, holding particular views, and suppressing parts of themselves that did not fit within the approved framework. Over time, this shaped how people related to authority, expression, and self-belief. When worth is conditional, energy contracts. People become cautious about who they are allowed to be. Curiosity narrows. Emotional expression is restrained. Creativity becomes risky. These adaptations are not signs of weakness, they are survival strategies within controlled environments. Yet, when carried across generations, they harden into culture. Suppression does not eliminate energy, it redirects it. When expression is limited, unexpressed energy often turns inward or outward in less constructive ways. Resentment builds quietly. Anger simmers beneath politeness. Projection becomes common. Frustration that cannot be owned or explored safely is directed towards others. This dynamic can be heard in a familiar undercurrent. Why should you succeed if I was never allowed to? This is rarely spoken directly, yet it shapes social behaviour. Progress can feel threatening rather than inspiring. Freedom can be interpreted as disrespect rather than possibility. When people have been denied permission to grow, witnessing growth in others can open old wounds. This is not about blaming individuals or communities. These patterns develop slowly, often with good intentions at their core. They persist because they are inherited, not chosen. Children absorb emotional rules long before they understand belief systems, and over time those rules become internal limits. The energetic impact of this inheritance shows up in how people relate to authority and autonomy. Freedom is sometimes framed as something dangerous or undeserved. Expression is treated with suspicion. Success feels uncomfortable. These responses affect participation, confidence, and contribution at every level of society. Freedom, or independence in this sense, is not only a political concept, it is an energetic state. It refers to the internal experience of being able to think, feel, and express without fear of rejection or moral judgment. When people experience this kind of freedom, energy expands, engagement increases, self-belief grows, and contribution flows naturally. When freedom is restricted internally, political freedom alone cannot compensate. Systems may change, yet people remain constrained by inherited emotional rules. This disconnect explains why structural reforms sometimes fail to produce the expected outcomes. The energetic conditions remain unchanged. Scotland's challenge is not unique. Many societies carry similar legacies. What matters is recognising their influence honestly. Healing does not require rejection of faith or tradition. It requires loosening rigid interpretations that equate worth with conformity. It requires creating space for people to explore identity without fear. When people feel permitted to be themselves, energy returns. When energy returns, participation becomes possible. This has direct implications for well-being, community health, and economic contribution. People who feel internally free are more willing to engage, to take responsibility, and to invest in their surroundings. Moving beyond energetic suppression is a gradual process. It begins with awareness. It grows through leadership that models openness rather than control. It is supported by workplaces and communities that value authenticity alongside accountability. Understanding this aspect of Scotland's energetic history allows for compassion rather than judgment. It explains why certain patterns persist and why change can feel slow. It also points towards the need for a future where freedom is experienced internally as well as expressed externally. A nation that supports internal freedom strengthens its capacity to thrive. Energy flows more easily, belief expands, possibility opens, and this is not an abstract ideal. It is a practical condition for regeneration. Now let's look at the purpose, opportunity, and path out of low energy. Purpose is one of the strongest forces in human life. It gives shape to effort and meaning to challenge. When people feel that what they do matters, energy rises naturally. Motivation follows without being forced. Self-belief grows through experience rather than instruction. Purpose is not something that needs to be imposed. It emerges when people are given space and opportunity to contribute in ways that feel real to them. This is why purpose acts as the single strongest driver of self-belief. When individuals experience themselves as useful, capable, and valued, belief becomes embodied. It is no longer an idea or aspiration, it becomes something lived. That belief then fuels further participation, creating a reinforcing cycle that supports well-being and contribution. Opportunity matters more than instruction in this process. Telling people what they should do rarely changes behaviour in lasting ways. Offering opportunity allows people to discover what they can do. When systems focus on instruction, they often overlook context. When systems focus on opportunity, they invite engagement. Engagement creates learning, and learning builds confidence. Across Scotland, there are many examples of people who break difficult cycles when belief is supported by opportunity. Young people raised in environments shaped by addiction, poverty, or low expectations sometimes change their trajectory when a teacher, mentor, or employer recognises their potential. That recognition does not need to be dramatic. Often it is quiet and consistent. Someone is given a chance, someone is trusted, someone is seen. When belief is supported, effort becomes worthwhile. People invest energy because they sense a return. That return may be learning, progress, or dignity rather than immediate success. Over time, these experiences accumulate and reshape identity. The story people tell themselves about who they are begins to change. Systems play a decisive role here. Systems can create pathways, or they can apply pressure. Pathways invite people to step forward. They acknowledge starting points. They allow for uneven progress. Pressure, by contrast, assumes readiness and capacity that may not exist yet. Pressure can overwhelm, pathways build. Creating pathways means designing education, employment, and community systems that offer entry points rather than barriers. It means valuing contribution at different levels. It means recognizing effort alongside outcome. When people feel that there is a place for them, energy increases. When they feel excluded, energy drains. This approach often requires realism. Not everyone will engage. Some people are not ready. Some people will choose not to participate. Holding this reality calmly is important. A healthy system does not need universal buy-in to function. It needs enough people supported well enough to create momentum. That momentum then becomes visible and attractive to others over time. Trying to force engagement often backfires. Pressure reinforces resistance. Calm acceptance creates space. When people see others moving forward without judgment or comparison, curiosity replaces defensiveness, and engagement becomes possible again. Purpose is deeply linked to dignity. People need to feel that their presence matters, that they are not simply managed or assessed. When dignity is present, people contribute more willingly. This contribution may take many forms: work, care, creativity, learning, leadership. All of it adds to the health of the collective. For Scotland, restoring purpose across the population is both a well-being and an economic strategy, combined with simplifying and realigning the tax system to support people's growth. People who feel supported and purposeful participate more fully. Participation strengthens circulation. Circulation supports resilience. Money, as explored earlier, is created through interaction and exchange. Purpose restores the energy required for that exchange to happen. Low energy is not a permanent state. It is a signal that something essential is missing. When opportunity replaces pressure and purpose replaces fear, energy returns. This does not require perfection, it requires consistency and care. Understanding this shift can help the national conversation. Instead of asking why people disengage, we begin to ask what conditions allow people to re-engage. Instead of focusing on correction and ego-based leadership, we focused on restoration and service to help and support the communities. This shift changes outcomes. Purpose is not an abstract ideal, it is a practical lever for regeneration. When people are supported to find their place, belief grows. When belief grows, participation follows. When participation increases, the whole system becomes stronger. How can Scotland move forward energetically? If Scotland is to move forward energetically, change must begin with behaviour rather than rhetoric. The emotional tone of a nation is not set by policy documents or speeches. It is set by how people in positions of influence behave towards one another, especially when there is a disagreement. Leadership behaviour acts as a signal. That signal travels downwards, shaping culture long before any formal change takes effect. When leaders treat each other with respect, even in disagreement, they demonstrate that difference does not require hostility. They show that maturity is possible under pressure. This behaviour gives permission for the same tone to exist elsewhere. It filters into public discourse, workplaces, communities and families. Respect becomes normalised, not idealised. Respect is not softness, it is stability. It allows energy to become available for problem solving rather than being consumed by conflict. A respectful culture creates space for people to stay engaged rather than shutting down. Engagement strengthens participation and participation strengthens the collective. Corporations and organisations play a significant role in this energetic landscape. They are not only economic entities, they are emotional and social environments where people spend a large portion of their lives. How organisations treat employees influences health, confidence and identity. Workplaces that operate through fear, excessive evaluation or competition drain energy. Workplaces that offer trust, clarity and dignity restore it. Seeing corporates or organisations as energetic environments changes priorities. Productivity is no longer pursued at the expense of well-being. Instead, well-being becomes the driver of productivity. People who feel respected and trusted bring more out of themselves to their work. They collaborate more easily, they innovate more readily, they remain engaged for longer. These outcomes benefit both individuals and the wider economy. Community also matters deeply. Humans are not designed to operate in isolation. Belonging supports regulation, confidence and resilience. Communities that create opportunities for contribution strengthen collective energy. This does not require uniformity, it requires inclusion. People need to feel there is a place for them even when their contribution looks different from others. Purpose sits at the centre of this process. Purpose gives people a reason to show up. It links personal effort to something larger. When people understand how they contribute, energy increases. When contribution is recognised, belief grows. Purpose functions as a health strategy as much as an economic one. It supports mental, emotional, spiritual and physical well-being simultaneously. Scotland's future strength depends on recognising this interdependence. Economic regeneration cannot be separated from emotional regeneration. Structural change without cultural change produces limited results. Energetic coherence emerges when respect, belief, and opportunity align. A future Scotland based on energetic strength would prioritise long-term thinking over short-term reaction. It would value emotional maturity and leadership as much as technical skill. It would recognise that confidence grows through consistency rather than spectacle. It would invest in systems that restore energy rather than consume it. Respect would be visible, not performative. Belief would be cultivated through opportunity rather than rhetoric. Visionary thinking would replace constant urgency for reform and independence and change. Emotional maturity would guide decision-making. Energetic coherence would become a shared aim rather than an abstract idea. This is not an idealized vision, it is a practical one. These conditions are observable in places that thrive. They can be cultivated deliberately. They require commitment and patience, yet they offer stability in return very quickly. Scotland already contains pockets of this future. They exist in communities, organisations and initiatives where people collaborate, plan ahead and treat each other with care. Scaling this requires leadership that understands energy as a national asset. That is human energy, the vibe, the frequency, the confidence of the nation. It requires courage to move beyond fear-based systems and short-term beliefs. It requires willingness to model the behaviour we want to see. Moving forward energetically does not mean ignoring challenges. It means meeting them with steadiness rather than aggression. It means holding complexity without collapsing into division. It means recognising that how we move together matters as much as where we are going to go. If Scotland can strengthen its energetic coherence, it strengthens its capacity to choose its future. Respect builds belief. Belief fuels participation. Participation creates resilience. And that is how nations regenerate from the inside out. That is the energetic path forward. To sum up this podcast, human energy is the missing conversation in the future of Scotland. Energy is not separate from economics, governance or health, it runs through all of them. How a nation feels about itself shapes how it behaves. How people treat each other shapes what they are willing to contribute. How leaders behave shapes what becomes normal. A country's future depends on whether its people feel respected, capable and purposeful. When self-belief is present, people participate. When purpose is available, people contribute. When respect is modelled, energy stabilises and trust grows. Scotland's potential does not lie in trying to force outcomes through pressure or ideology. It lies in restoring the conditions that allow people to engage willingly. Those are belief, purpose, dignity and respect. These are not abstract ideals. They are practical foundations for well-being, productivity and long-term resilience. When energy is depleted, systems struggle. When energy is restored, systems begin to work again. This is the conversation that has been missing. In the next episode, we will move from energy into structure. We'll look at what leadership, systems and governance actually needs to be and to provide if a country is to regenerate rather than simply manage decline. Because when you strip away all the noise, a government is responsible for three fundamental things: keeping people alive and well, keeping the country functioning, keeping the future possible. Everything else is detail. Stay tuned for the next episode and we'll explore what this all really means.